Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're plunging into a concept that feels, well, both ancient and maybe shockingly relevant: leisure.
It really does feel timely, doesn't it?
It does. And I know what you might be thinking. Leisure? Seriously, who even has time for that? And isn't it mostly just, crashing on the sofa, binge watching something, maybe catching up on sleep?
Right, that's the common idea, just downtime.
And that right there, that's the tension we want to explore today. There's this feeling everywhere, isn't there, that we should always be busy, always productive, always switched on.
Oh, definitely. The hustle culture is everywhere.
We glorify it, this relentless focus on hard work. And often it feels like there's hardly any time left for anything that isn't directly tied to some tangible outcome or just getting ready to go back to work.
It's a really profound societal shift, I think, and leaves a lot of us feeling constantly drained, like we're just stuck on this endless treadmill. The balance, or maybe the imbalance, between work and what we think of as leisure, it's really shifted dramatically. What used to be seen as a fundamental part of being human, a vital space for inner growth, now feels almost like a luxury.
Or even worse, sometimes like a sign of laziness, maybe.
Could be.
Huh.
We've kind of become caught in this cycle of what some people call total work, where almost every aspect of life, even our supposed downtime, seems to just revolve around maximizing output or getting ready for the next thing, the next workday.
That pressure, that feeling of always needing to be on, it really is a central tension in modern life. It makes the work we're discussing today feel even more urgent, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Which brings us, I suppose, to our central question for this deep dive. What if our modern understanding of leisure is just fundamentally flawed? What if this misunderstanding isn't just about, personal stress and individual burnout?
Which are serious enough on their own.
Absolutely. But what if it's actually at the root of something much deeper, a more pervasive cultural crisis?
That's a big question.
It is. And to explore it, we're turning to a really quite radical thinker, a German Catholic philosopher named Joseph Pieper, and specifically his seminal work from 1948, which came out in English in 1952, titled Leisure: The Basis of Culture.
Pieper's work, it's not just some nostalgic look back at a golden age or anything. It's a really powerful reevaluation of what leisure truly means. He challenges centuries of assumptions, really, about work, about value, about what it means to be human.
A reevaluation, I like that.
Yeah, it's a profound call to rethink our priorities, not just as individuals trying to, manage stress better, but maybe as a whole society grappling with its very foundations.
So our mission today is to unpack Pieper's arguments, try to understand his critique of the modern world, which feels startlingly like our world, and discover why true leisure, his kind of leisure, might just be the missing piece. For personal fulfillment, maybe, but also for cultural flourishing.
That's the goal. We'll explore his ideas, the historical context they came from, which is crucial, and their relevance today, which is sometimes quite unsettling.
Okay, let's dive in. To really get a grip on Pieper's argument, I think we need to know a bit about the man himself and the world he was writing in.
Definitely. Context is key here.
So Joseph Pieper, he was a German Catholic philosopher born in 1904, lived a long life until 1993. He had a pretty formidable academic journey, didn't he? Studying philosophy, law, sociology.
Yes, at the universities of Berlin and Münster. And this wasn't just, ticking boxes. It was a serious, rigorous exploration across different fields, which really shaped his holistic view of human existence, I think.
And then he had this long career professor of philosophical anthropology at Münster from 1950 right through to 1976.
And incredibly, he kept lecturing until 1996, well into his 90s. His intellectual energy must have been immense, just really sustained.
Amazing. But what's absolutely crucial, as you said, is the timing of leisure, the basis of culture. The German original, Muse und Kult, came out in 1948.
Just think about that. 1948, 3 years after the end of World War II. Germany was, literally in ruins. Cities flattened, infrastructure gone, millions displaced or dead.
It's hard to even imagine the scale of devastation.
The entire nation was just consumed by this gargantuan task of physical survival, of rebuilding. Pieper himself uses the phrase rebuilding a house, but in the most literal sense possible. The focus was just securing immediate existence, food, shelter, basic survival.
So in that kind of environment where every single bit of effort seemed necessary just to keep going, just to put bricks back together, Pieper comes along talking about the profound importance of non-useful activities.
Exactly. Things that don't directly contribute to rebuilding the houses or the factories. Things that aren't about immediate utility.
It must have sounded incredibly counterintuitive, maybe even, I don't know, provocatively irresponsible to some people.
You can imagine it, can't you? It's like telling someone who's desperately trying to patch a roof during a storm to stop and, I don't know, contemplate the beauty of the rain clouds.
Yeah, it completely flips the script on what everyone else probably thought was valuable or productive at that moment.
And yet, Pieper wasn't just, spinning these ideas out of thin air. He wasn't offering some kind of escapist fantasy. He was deeply, deeply grounded in classical philosophy.
Plato, Aristotle.
Absolutely, both of whom really emphasized contemplation as the highest human activity. And he also leaned very heavily on medieval thinkers, especially Thomas Aquinas.
Right, Aquinas is huge for Pieper.
Huge. Aquinas' synthesis of faith and reason profoundly influenced Pieper's whole view of reality, of human nature. So this grounding allowed him to present his ideas not as some brand new theory he just cooked up, but as rediscovered truths, maybe truths that had been forgotten in the rush towards modernity.
So he was trying to bridge that gap, wasn't he? Take this ancient and medieval wisdom and show how it was still relevant, how it spoke directly to modern problems.
Precisely. His work can really be seen as a direct challenge to the philosophical trends of his time, which he felt had distanced themselves too much from theology, from traditional wisdom, maybe become too specialized or too focused on utility.
It wasn't about being deliberately old-fashioned then. It was more about tapping into enduring insights that he felt had been maybe sidelined or dismissed.
I think that's right. And you see this in other things he did too. For instance, he translated C.S. Lewis's The Problem of Pain into German.
Oh, interesting. Lewis wasn't exactly an academic philosopher in the same vein.
No, but it shows Pieper engaging with contemporary Christian thought outside the usual academic circles. It shows his commitment to making these profound ideas accessible, relevant, bridging those gaps.
And that commitment seems reflected in his writing style, too, doesn't it? You mentioned he wasn't writing huge, dense volumes.
No, not at all. He wasn't someone who composed these vast, massive tomes filled with obscure jargon. His typical form was the essay. Often, as one reviewer noted, that could be read at a sitting.
Which is appealing.
Very. His writing is succinct, but incredibly learned. And refreshingly, he tends to avoid unnecessary jargon. He wants to be understood.
That intentional clarity must be a big reason why his work resonated so widely, both then and now. He seems to believe that philosophical truth shouldn't be locked away for an academic elite.
Exactly. It's a rare gift, that ability to convey deep thoughts clearly.
Okay, so let's really unpack this core concept, leisure. Because, as we've hinted, for Pieper, it is not what most of us usually mean by the word.
Not even close, really.
When we talk about leisure today, it's usually, time off work, recreation, maybe recovering so that we can go back to work and be productive again.
Yeah, it's functional. It serves work, in a way.
But for Pieper, that's just scratching the surface. His central thesis really challenges that common idea. He writes that leisure is fundamentally an attitude of mind and a condition of the soul.
A condition of the soul that's already lifting it into a different realm.
It is. He says it's about fostering a capacity to perceive the reality of the world, which is, well, it's a lot deeper and more demanding than just watching Netflix after a long day.
Absolutely. It's an internal state, not just an external activity or lack of activity. And he contrasts this profoundly with what he calls total work.
Total work. Can you unpack that a bit?
Well, imagine a society where life revolves almost exclusively around work, and not just physical labor. He's clear about that. Even intellectual activity comes to be viewed primarily as intellectual work.
Valued only for its output, its utility.
Precisely, which is a radical departure from how, say, the ancient Greeks viewed intellectual pursuit. For them, the pinnacle was often contemplation, theoria, valued entirely for its own sake, not for what it could produce.
Okay, so this connects to a distinction he makes about ways of knowing, right?
Yeah.
Ratio versus intellectus.
Yes, this is fundamental for him, drawing on that classical and medieval tradition, particularly Aquinas again. There are these two basic modes of knowing. There's ratio.
Which is like active thinking, logic, reasoning.
Exactly. It's discursive thought, active effort, logical examination. Pieper describes it almost like mentally running to and fro, meticulously building an argument, solving a problem, analyzing, breaking things down. It involves effort, exertion.
Okay, so that's ratio. What's intellectus?
Intellectus is different. It's more like simple looking, receptive vision, an effortless contemplation where truth kind of presents itself to you almost intuitively.
Like seeing something clearly all at once.
Yes, like a landscape suddenly revealing itself. It's not about striving and straining, it's about receiving. a simple grasp of reality as it presents itself.
And Pieper's argument is that modern society has basically forgotten or devalued Intellectus.
Pretty much. He argues that modern thought, heavily influenced by thinkers like Kant maybe, tends to define human knowing almost entirely as ratio as activity, and nothing but activity. It's all about investigating, articulating, proving, pushing forward. Work.
The nuisance of labor, as he puts it, even in knowing.
Right. And this overemphasis on ratio, on effortful activity, is where he thinks we lose something absolutely essential to our humanity. There's this inherent bias that creeps in the idea that truth is only really valid, only really known, if you've sweated for it.
If you put in the work.
If you put in the work. So anything that seems effortless, like Intellectus, becomes suspicious.
Yeah.
Less valuable. Maybe even lazy thinking.
And this extends even to ethics, right? The idea that the good must be difficult.
Yes, we often assume that. We value the struggle sometimes more than the outcome itself. If something good comes easily, we almost don't trust it.
Which is fascinating because we are often told, maybe implicitly, that if something doesn't involve hard work, it's not truly earned, not legitimate.
But Pieper, quoting Aquinas again, flips that right on its head.
Yeah.
He brings up Aquinas saying something like, the essence of virtue consists more in the good than in the difficult.
Meaning the goodness itself matters more than how hard it was to achieve.
Exactly. True virtue or true knowing can be effortless in this sense. It might arise spontaneously from love or from a direct receptive grasp of reality. The Intellectus, not necessarily from painful struggle.
So the profound insight here is that our modern obsession with effort, with measurable output, might actually be blinding us to a more fundamental way of knowing.
That's precisely his point. This receptive, effortless understanding Intellectus, he believes, is essential to truly grasp reality. It's not just a different cognitive style. It's like a lost spiritual capacity that our society actively devalues.
And by devaluing it, we devalue ourselves.
In a way, yes. Because the problem really escalates when this worker ideal becomes the dominant model for human life, applied to every sphere.
The intellectual worker.
Right. That concept implies, as Pieper puts it, that nobody is granted a free zone of intellectual activity. All thinking must somehow contribute, be useful, be productive in a societal sense.
It has to justify itself based on its function.
Yes. It's a subtle but really profound shift from pursuing truth because it's true to pursuing truth because it's useful. And that, for Pieper, turns philosophers, artists, thinkers into mere functionaries.
Which brings us directly to why leisure, in this deeper sense, is so essential for culture and contemplation. He uses another distinction from Aquinas here, doesn't he? Liberal arts versus servile arts.
Yes, he revives this crucial distinction. It's vital to his argument.
How does he define them? What are the servile arts?
Okay, so servile arts are those that are ordered to some utility, some external purpose. They're about producing a useful effect, creating something tangible, or serving a practical need.
Like carpentry, medicine.
Or engineering, or maybe most forms of modern specialized professional training that are geared towards a specific job or economic outcome. They serve a purpose outside themselves.
Okay, and the liberal arts?
The liberal arts, artes liberales, are different. They are valuable in themselves. They are, in Pieper's terms, ordered to knowing. They're not disposable for external purposes or purely utilitarian goals.
They don't need to be justified by a job market outcome or a contribution to GDP.
Exactly. Their value is intrinsic. They're about expanding the human spirit, fostering understanding for its own sake. They are free, liberal from the demands of immediate utility.
And philosophy, for Pieper, is the prime example, the most liberal art.
Yes, in its purest form, because philosophy transcends that workaday world of usefulness and purposeful action. It asks the biggest questions, doesn't it? About the whole of what exists, about God and the world.
Questions that often have no immediate practical application but are fundamental to finding meaning.
Right. It's not primarily about what can be done, but about what is. About understanding reality itself.
So the philosophical act for him is inherently an act of transcendence.
That's how he puts it. An act in which the workaday world is transcended. It means stepping outside that daily grind, the constant anxieties about survival or getting ahead, the relentless focus on what he calls common utility.
And he makes a distinction there. Common utility isn't the same as common good.
That's a really important nuance. Common utility is about practical, measurable needs, building that bridge, writing that code, fixing that plumbing, necessary things, but limited. The common good is much broader, more comprehensive. It includes the flourishing of the human spirit, things like contemplation, philosophical inquiry, the appreciation of beauty, justice, community, things that aren't easily measured by utility.
So transcendence isn't just escaping work, it's accessing a different realm of value. And this links to his idea of wonder, doesn't it?
Yes, morandum, or the Greek thaumazein. He sees this sense of wonder as the very origin of philosophy, and also poetry. It's a state that's fundamentally non-bourgeois, meaning it's not driven by economic gain or social status.
What triggers this wonder?
It happens when the ordinary, the everyday, suddenly becomes transparent, when you glimpse a deeper, mysterious reality behind the surface of things. It requires, he says, a purely receptive stance toward reality, a willingness to just look and see, undisturbed by the immediate will to change things, to manipulate or to exploit.
That sounds like Theoria again, pure contemplation.
Exactly. It's that state of receptive seeing. And Pieper argues that where this capacity for wonder is lost, maybe where religion is suppressed, the arts are neglected. Or profound experiences like love and death are stripped to their depth, reduced to mere biology or psychology.
Then true philosophy can't really thrive.
That's his argument. Instead, you get pseudoforms, things that look like philosophy or art or spirituality, but they never actually manage to transcend the canopy of the workaday world. They remain stuck in the realm of utility, even when they seem to be about higher things.
Wow. Okay, and this ties into maybe the most challenging part of his argument for many modern people, the connection between leisure and worship, or cultus.
Yes, this is deep and can feel counterintuitive today, especially in more secular societies.
He states it so bluntly, culture lives on worship. How does he justify this? Is he saying you can't have real leisure or real culture without formal religion?
It's a challenging but absolutely central point for him. He argues that true festivity, the purest expression of leisure, derives its very life and meaning from religious worship, from cult. Why? Because worship is, by its nature, profoundly non-utilitarian.
How so?
Think about it. At its core, worship often involves sacrifice, giving something without expecting a tangible return in the worldly sense. It involves celebration of reality for its own sake, acknowledging something transcendent, something beyond the purely material world. It creates, he says, a space of abundance and wealth, even amidst material poverty, because it's a moment deliberately removed from the cycle of production and consumption.
A space defined by non-usefulness.
Precisely. A space created by that very sacrifice and non-usefulness. And that space, that recognition of the sheer givenness, the gratuity of existence, is where true leisure is ultimately found, according to Pieper. It's rooted in acknowledging something beyond ourselves and our immediate needs.
And this is why he's critical of modern, maybe secular attempts at festivals, like Labor Day.
Exactly. He sees many modern artificial festivals as lacking this essential quality. They often end up being just breaks from work in order to recuperate from more work, or they become occasions for mass consumption. They remain firmly within the logic of the total work mindset, rather than truly transcending it through an act of non-utilitarian celebration or worship.
So it's not just about stopping work, it's about entering a completely different dimension of time and being, one rooted in acceptance and celebration, not production.
That's the idea. And this leads directly into his powerful argument about deproletarianization, which, as we touched on, isn't just about economics for him.
Right, it's not just about being poor in the material sense.
No, not at all. For Pieper, being a proletarian means being bound to the working process, totally absorbed by it. And this binding can happen for different reasons. It could be lack of ownership of your work, like in classic Marxist analysis. It could be state compulsion. But critically, for Pieper, it can also stem from internal spiritual poverty.
What does he mean by that? Internal spiritual poverty.
He means a state where your entire being, your horizon of meaning, is completely satisfied by the work process itself, where the inner space for anything else, for contemplation, for wonder, for celebration, for the liberal arts, has just shrunk or disappeared entirely.
So you've become defined solely by your function, your utility.
Yes, you become a functionary. Therefore, deproletarianization, for Pieper, is about much more than just economic uplift. It's about widening one's existence beyond the realm of the merely useful, servile work. It's about pushing back the boundaries of the artist's serviles to make more room for the artist's liberale.
It requires opening up an area of true leisure.
Exactly, and meaningful activity that is not work. This is a challenge, he implies, not just for the economically disadvantaged, but for everyone caught in that total work mindset. Even the wealthiest person can be spiritually proletarian if their entire existence, their entire sense of self, is consumed by utility and work, by doing rather than being.
That's a profound redefinition. It really moves beyond class in the economic sense, to a kind of spiritual condition. It means that someone who's financially secure but maybe constantly optimizing their free time for self-improvement courses or side hustles, or just simply unable to truly rest and contemplate, they could be just as proletarian in Pieper's sense.
Yes, because they are still fundamentally bound to the logic of the working process, whether that binding is external or internal. Owned by it, in a way, it implies a kind of inner liberation is needed.
Okay, so when this book, Leisure, The Basis of Culture, lands in the English-speaking world in 1952, it even has an introduction by T.S. Eliot. That's quite an endorsement.
It certainly signaled its intellectual weight. Eliot was a major figure, and it definitely stirred the pot, arriving in that post-war, Cold War context.
What was the initial reaction like? How was it received?
Well, the reception seems to have been largely enthusiastic, especially within certain academic and religious communities who were already grappling with the big questions about culture, meaning, and the direction of Western society after the war. Reviewers really recognized its profound countercultural message.
They saw it as an alternative.
Yes, a vital alternative to the overwhelming emphasis on productivity, reconstruction, and maybe even the emerging consumerism.
You mentioned some specific reviews earlier. The Spectator praised its lucid explanation of the present crisis in civilization.
Yes, and they noted how our constant focus on rewards and social utility has, quote, cut away the roots on which our culture rests. That's a powerful image. It implies that without genuine leisure, we're essentially building our society on sand, culturally speaking.
They saw leisure as a prerequisite for any cultural revival.
Right, and they had that incredibly sharp insight. Much of our most strenuous activity is, in fact, carefully organized and heavily publicized idleness.
Ouch. Because it's activity to no purpose?
Exactly. That's a brutal assessment, isn't it? It suggests that all our frantic busyness, our obsession with being productive, might just be a sophisticated, well-marketed form of inner emptiness, activity masking a void.
It certainly resonates today. What about the New Statesman and Nation?
They lauded its refreshing clarity and directness. They particularly like how Pieper pushed back against the purely rationalist tradition, the one that tried to completely divorce philosophy from theology. Pieper argued for a more integrated approach to truth.
And they noted the new illumination he gives to concepts of work and the worker state, wages, the proletariat.
Yes, showing how even political concepts and slogans can get twisted when the deeper meaning of leisure is lost. They pointed out a fascinating historical example Pieper likely had in mind. Comparing Stalin's shift in phrasing a socialist ideal, it went from to each according to his needs, focusing on the person, to each according to his work.
Prioritizing output, utility.
Exactly. Putting the work, the function, above the human person's needs and dignity, which they contrasted starkly with the Catholic social teaching position that the primary right of the worker is to a wage which will enable him to support a family, grounding rights in the person and their needs, not just their productivity.
That's a really potent illustration of how losing the concept of leisure, of human dignity beyond work, can impact even our ideas of social justice and rights. What did the New York Times book review make of it?
Well, they admitted Pieper was pretty much unknown to the American layman at the time. But they recognized his profound insight into what they called the rapid totalitarian drift of Western culture.
Strong words, totalitarian drift.
Yes, they saw his critique of total work as having implications for political freedom, too. They emphasized the impressive and even formidable consequences of philosophy, cutting itself off from theology, suggesting this divorce leads inevitably towards a loss of meaning and perhaps makes societies more vulnerable to totalitarian ideologies that promise a false sense of purpose.
And they also picked up on the nature of leisure itself.
Yes, they underlined that contemplative leisure, Pieper's kind, isn't laziness. It's active listening. It's receptive engagement with reality. Not slothful, but deeply attentive.
And commonweal. They seem to really get to the heart of it.
They did. They called it a brilliant examination of leisure as an affirmative condition, a state you achieve, not just a lack of work, a condition by which humans can transcend the world of work and contemplate the big things, himself, the universe, and God.
And they connected the decline of leisure directly to a cultural crisis.
Directly. They saw the disappearance of popular regard for leisure as a sign of a major culture crisis, and they linked it to the triumph of what they called the bourgeois spirit, that focused on utility, acquisition status, which they controversially stated is at heart the enemy of Christ.
Wow, so they framed it in almost spiritual warfare terms. A society dominated by utility versus a life oriented towards deeper truths.
It suggests just how high the stakes felt to some readers at the time.
Okay, so clearly a lot of enthusiasm, particularly from those corners. But it wasn't all just unanimous praise, was it? Were there points of contention, nuances, criticisms?
No, it wasn't universally embraced without some pushback or questions, as you'd expect with challenging ideas. Some reviewers, quite naturally, found his strong arguments about the dependence of culture and philosophy upon religion and theology difficult, especially those who didn't share his Catholic faith or who came from a more secular humanist perspective.
That makes sense. The cultist aspect would be a barrier for some.
Definitely. His deep reliance on Aquinas, his Thomist perspective, was also noted. Some felt he might have been more attuned to Christianity's debts, to Greek philosophy, Plato, and Aristotle, than perhaps to its Hebrew origins, or maybe unaware of potential parallels in other traditions, like Hindu ideas about caste and social roles.
Interesting point about potential blind spots. What else?
Well, there was some discussion, maybe discomfort, around the potential implication that a kind of leisured and dedicated caste might be necessary for a true cultural revival.
Ah, the elite question. That would definitely raise eyebrows in a democratic society focused on equality.
Precisely. It could sound a bit elitist or impractical in a modern context. And, as often happens with thinkers who draw heavily on tradition, some reviewers admitted his philosophy might seem old-fashioned, clinging to distinctions that felt maybe out of step with the progressive thrust of mid-20th century thought.
But others saw that as a strength.
Yes, exactly. Like that Spectator reviewer who countered that this wasn't a defect at all, but perhaps its very strength, offering timeless wisdom that was needed precisely because the world was changing so fast and maybe losing its bearings.
So his ideas were definitely provocative. They forced readers, and still force us, to really confront some fundamental assumptions about work, value, culture, and what it means to live a good life. They invite a deep, maybe sometimes uncomfortable self-reflection.
Absolutely. They don't offer easy answers.
Okay, let's fast forward. Here we are, decades later. You might be listening to this and thinking, okay, Pieper wrote this back in 1948. Post-war Germany. Scarcity. Rebuilding. How relevant is this really to my life? Here in the 21st century, surrounded by digital technology, maybe dealing more with information overload than physical scarcity.
And the answer, I think, is that it's incredibly relevant. Maybe even more relevant now than when he first wrote it.
Why do you say that?
Because his observations just echo so loudly in our modern world. Think about what we now call burnout culture. The relentless pressure for 247 productivity.
It's everywhere.
Pieper's concept of the frenzied need to work, his picture of total work, it perfectly describes this contemporary glorification of busyness, doesn't it? We wear our exhaustion almost like a badge of honor.
So busy is often said with a strange kind of pride.
Exactly. We feel this constant pressure to be productive, to optimize every single waking moment, even sometimes our sleep. And this often leads, as Pieper predicted, to a kind of bare, hopeless effort resembling the labor of Sisyphus.
Pushing the boulder uphill, only for it to roll back down.
Over and over again. You find yourself working late, constantly feeling like you're falling behind anyway. Or you try to relax on the weekend, but you feel guilty about it, anxious about the work piling up. Pieper would say, that's the Sisyphusian trap. It's activity, yes, but frantic activity without genuine purpose, without true rest, without that element of celebration or acceptance.
And the digital age seems to have just put this on steroids, hasn't it? It distorts our sense of time, our sense of presence.
Completely. Our constant digital engagement, whether it's, the endless scroll through social media, feeling compelled to check emails at all hours, chasing every notification, ping.
It fragments our attention.
Totally fragments our attention, and it embodies what Pieper called the time killing and boredom that results from losing that inner capacity for leisure. These hectic amusements, as he termed them, they're so paradoxical.
Oh, so.
Well, they keep us constantly active, clicking, scrolling, reacting. But so often, this activity is, as he said, to no purpose. It's just preventing us from maybe confronting our own inner state or the reality of our lives. It actively prevents the stillness needed for true contemplation.
So we're busy, but maybe achieving nothing of real substance.
It creates this strange situation.
Mm.
We're constantly active, seemingly engaged, but it can lead to a kind of moral, intellectual, and emotional idleness, as Pieper might put it. We're busy doing nothing truly meaningful, just passing time, reacting to stimuli, without really engaging our deeper intellect or soul in that receptive way he valued.
And if we take Pieper's idea of the functionary, the person bound to the working process, and look at something like the modern gig economy, The parallels are pretty chilling, aren't they?
They really are. In many parts of the gig economy, individuals essentially become functionaries for algorithms, don't they? Their performance is precisely measured, managed by data, driven purely by immediate utility and efficiency metrics, delivery times, customer ratings, tasks completed.
With very little room for autonomy, creativity, or what Pieper called that free zone of activity.
Often, yes. Your worth becomes reduced to your measurable output, your function within the system. The total working state that Pieper analyzed as a potential political threat can be seen, perhaps, as an analogy for these highly controlled, data-driven work environments today.
Where human existence gets reduced to use and services.
Exactly. Measured by metrics, driven by immediate output. The individual's broader well-being, their capacity for creativity, their need for contemplation or genuine rest, those things often become secondary, if they're considered at all. It's not necessarily state compulsion anymore, but maybe algorithmic compulsion, economic necessity, driving this reduction of the human to a function.
This also raises some really profound questions when we think about artificial intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. Huge questions.
If we go back to Pieper's distinction ratio versus Intellectus, AI is getting incredibly good at ratio, isn't it?
Phenomenally good. Logical processing, discursive thought, analyzing massive data sets, identifying patterns, generating complex outputs at speeds we can't even comprehend. That's pure ratio in action.
So the question becomes, if human knowing is only activity, if it's solely about ratio, what's left that truly distinguishes us from highly advanced AI? Where does our unique human value lie?
It's a critical question. And Pieper's emphasis on intellectus, that receptive vision, the effortless insight, the capacity for wonder, for contemplation, offers a really powerful counterpoint, I think.
You mean that's something AI can't do?
He would argue, yes. True human uniqueness, he suggests, might lie precisely in this capacity for receptive understanding of reality, this ability to simply look, to listen into the being of things, as he sometimes puts it. AI can process, generate, optimize, calculate. But can it genuinely wonder? Can it truly receive reality as a gift? Can it simply be in contemplative silence?
Probably not, by its very nature as a programmed system.
Right, so Pieper implies our very human dignity is tied to this contemplative capacity, this intellectus. And that capacity is deeply threatened when we reduce ourselves and our view of knowledge to mere processing, mere ratio. We risk becoming poor imitations of the machines we create.
And his concerns about education seem just as relevant today. The idea that professional training is replacing true education building.
Incredibly prescient. Education, to Pieper, should be concerned with forming the whole human being, making them able to comprehend the sum total of existing things. It's about wisdom, not just skills.
But increasingly, you see educational systems focusing on specialized functions, right? Producing skilled functionaries needed for the economy.
Often at the expense, perhaps, of broader knowledge, critical thinking about fundamental questions, or nurturing that sense of wonder.
This is exactly why he was so concerned about academic freedom and the philosophical nature of university education. He saw it being threatened when knowledge becomes solely functional knowing, when it's only valued if it's subordinate to some external utilitarian purpose.
Yes. If the main question asked about any field of study becomes, what is it for? In a narrow, practical sense, or how does it serve the economy or this political agenda, then the pursuit of truth for its own sake, the very essence of the liberal arts, is undermined.
He worried about philosophers becoming just spin doctors for ideologies.
He uses that kind of language.
Yeah.
If society says we need philosophers who will justify such and such an ideology, then philosophy itself ceases to be a free liberal art. It becomes mere propaganda, a tool. It loses its inherent dignity and its critical function.
It really does feel like a productivity paradox playing out.
Yeah.
Prioritizing usefulness and effort above everything else might actually be self-defeating in the long run.
You become so focused on the how and the how much that you lose sight of the why. You get bent over by the labor, as he quotes that Russian saying.
Work does not make you rich, it only makes you bent over. A physical metaphor for a kind of spiritual or intellectual deformation.
I think so. Bent over, unable to look up and see the whole picture, maybe. And he contrasts this sharply with the space of abundance and wealth created by genuine festivals, by acts of worship.
Because they are centered on non-usefulness, on sacrifice.
Yes. They're not about maximizing output, they're about celebrating existence itself. They demonstrate a completely different kind of productivity, one rooted in giving, in receiving, in acknowledging the goodness of being rather than just the efficiency of doing. In a true feast, you're not earning your rest. You are receiving it as a gift.
So ultimately, Piper's work is a fundamental challenge to the core assumptions driving modern work culture. It's not just tweaking the system, it's questioning the system itself.
It really is. It suggests that true human flourishing, real cultural vitality, requires us to recover something profound, the sacred understanding of leisure, of contemplation, of pursuing knowledge and beauty for their own sake. His ideas are a powerful defiance of the world of total work.
They invite us to reconsider what it truly means to be human, especially now in this increasingly frantic, technologically saturated world.
It's about remembering, isn't it? Remembering that we are not just producers, not just consumers, not just functionaries, but beings capable of wonder, capable of insight, capable of genuine, restorative, celebratory rest.
Okay, as we start to wrap up this deep dive into Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the basis of culture, let's try and crystallize the main takeaways. What are the core ideas you should really carry with you from this incredibly insightful and maybe challenging work?
Well, first and foremost, I think, is remembering Pieper's radical redefinition of leisure. It is not just idleness. It's not simply recovery time so you can work more. It's a profound condition of the soul.
An attitude of mind.
Exactly. It's about receptive contemplation, fostering that capacity to perceive the reality of the world. It's an inner stillness, an openness that allows for genuine insight. It's actually a state of deep engagement with reality, not an escape from it.
Okay, point one, leisure is receptive contemplation. What's next?
Second, this true leisure is founded on wonder, that memorandum, that sense of awe at existence itself, that moment when the ordinary suddenly seems extraordinary, pointing to something deeper.
And this wonder is essential.
He argues it's essential for true culture to flourish, for deep philosophical insight, and just for human flourishing beyond being a mere functionary in the machine of utility. Wonder is the source, the wellspring of real creativity and wisdom.
Got it. Wonder is the foundation. Third point.
Third, the modern ethos of total work, with its relentless overvaluation of effort, busyness, and utility, actively alienates us from this fundamental human need for leisure and contemplation. It reduces us to intellectual workers, to functionaries.
Where everything, even thinking, has to serve some external purpose.
Right, often at the expense of deeper understanding, spiritual well-being, or the very things like wonder, like contemplation that make us distinctly human.
Okay, and finally,
Pieper's idea of true deproletarianization. It's not just about economics. It's about actively cultivating meaningful non-work activity, opening up that space in our lives and in society for the truly liberal arts, for pursuits that are valuable in themselves.
it's about freeing ourselves from that internal compulsion, that internal drive towards constant usefulness.
Exactly. Reclaiming our capacity for genuine contemplation, for celebration, for just being, not always doing.
So Pieper isn't just offering a critique, is he? He's pointing towards a path, maybe.
I think so. He encourages us to try and regain the art of silence and insight, to consciously choose to substitute true leisure for our hectic amusements. It's a really powerful call to recover a lost dimension of human experience, a crucial step, he believes, towards genuine cultural and personal renewal.
So listening to all this, what does it mean for you personally in your daily life? It's a lot to take in. Here's maybe a final provocative thought to leave you with, something Pieper might ask. What if our relentless pursuit of getting things done, our constant busyness, and maybe that underlying fear we sometimes feel about doing nothing, what if that's not actually a sign of progress or efficiency or strength?
What if it's something else?
What if it's actually a symptom of a deeper spiritual poverty? What Pieper called a despair of weakness, a kind of refusal to simply be what we truly are, maybe because we're afraid of silence, afraid of what we might find there, even while we frantically believe we're achieving something important.
That's a really challenging question. It forces us to look beyond the immediate utility, beyond the to-do list, and consider the profound, often hidden costs of our modern way of life. And maybe, just maybe, what we might gain by occasionally just stopping, looking, listening, receiving.
Food for thought, definitely. If this discussion resonated with you, we absolutely encourage you to engage directly with Joseph Pieper's Leisure, The Basis of Culture. It's a short book, but as you've heard, incredibly dense and impactful.
It really rewards rereading, too. And for maybe some continued philosophical reflections on life, contemplation, and finding meaning amidst the noise, the sources we look at also suggested checking out Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, another classic source of wisdom.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep